The deep ocean is the largest crime scene on Earth, and we have barely dusted for fingerprints. Shipwrecks holding fortunes that nations went to war over, vessels that vanished with no distress call and no survivors, and engineering failures so catastrophic they rewrote maritime law, all of it sitting in crushing darkness. We are travelling across 4 oceans and 100 years to examine 8 wrecks that forced historians to rewrite the textbooks. We'll start with the Titanic, where the most complete scan ever attempted reveals the ship's death in photographic precision. Then we descend to a Viking warship off the Danish coast, with wooden dragon carvings so intact you can see the chisel marks. We move to Antarctica, where Shackleton's Endurance emerged from the ice, looking like it sank yesterday instead of a century ago. We shift to Alabama, where the Clotilda, America's last slave ship, was found deliberately burned and buried in river mud. We cross to the North Sea, where Doggerland's drowned forests still trap Stone Age tools in their roots. We examine Greece's Pavlopetri, the oldest sunken city on the planet, with streets and buildings mapped in perfect detail. We descend into Mexico's underwater caves, where human skeletons rest beside Ice Age sloths. And finally, we explore the Antikythera wreck, where ancient computers corrode alongside marble gods. If that sounds like a journey worth taking, strap in, because the ocean has been hiding evidence, and we are about to bring it into the light.
National Geographic explorer at large, Dr. Robert Ballard discovered the wreck of the RMS Titanic in 1985.
Look at that thing!
That is big.
Oh God, it's a boiler!
This sucker exists!
He opened a new chapter in a page-turner we haven't been able to put down for over 100 years.
The Titanic sits in absolute darkness, 3,800 metres below the surface of the North Atlantic, 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. At this depth, the pressure is crushing, the temperature hovers just above freezing, and no natural light has reached this spot since the ship sank on April 15th, 1912. For over a century, the wreck has been visited by submersibles, each one peering through tiny viewports, illuminating only a few meters at a time, with powerful lights that get swallowed by the void. It is like being in a dark room with a weak flashlight. You see fragments, you see impressions, but you never see the whole picture. In the summer of 2022, a deep-sea mapping company called Magellan Limited stationed a research vessel directly above the Titanic wreck site and began the largest underwater scanning project in history. The mission was audacious: create a complete, exact digital replica of the entire wreck and debris field using technology that had been in development for 5 years. For 6 weeks, the team fought brutal weather and technical failures in the middle of the Atlantic. The project required over 200 hours of work at crushing depth, and the team deployed 2 remotely operated submersibles with a fitting pair of names, Romeo and Juliet. These robots travelled 2.3 miles down into the abyss, mapping every millimetre of the site without ever touching it. Regulations protecting the wreck are strict. You do not disturb the site. You do not remove artefacts. You document and you leave. Romeo and Juliet worked systematically, covering the bow, the stern, and the 3-mile debris field that stretches between them. The submersibles took over 715,000 photographs from every conceivable angle. Each image overlapped with the next, building a comprehensive record of every rivet, every porthole, every twisted piece of metal. The robots also used laser-based spatial measurements to create centimetre-accurate positioning data. The result was 16 terabytes of information, the equivalent of 6 million ebooks. When Gerhard Seifert, Magellan's 3D capture specialist, saw the data coming in, he later described the moment as revelatory. The level of detail, he said, was extraordinary. The bow of the Titanic is instantly recognisable. It sits upright on the ocean floor, its forward superstructure collapsed, but its iconic shape still commanding. The stern, however, is a chaotic tangle of steel. This section of the ship imploded as it sank, the immense pressure compressing the structure into a twisted ruin. The 2 sections are separated by about 800 metres, or 2,600 feet. Between them lies the debris field, a haunting spread of personal belongings, unopened champagne bottles, dozens of shoes, statues, and fragments of the ship itself. The site is a frozen moment of catastrophe. For months after the expedition, the Magellan team processed the data. William McMaster, the 3D lead and technical director for the project, spent countless hours turning raw photographs into a seamless digital model. The camera system used was surprisingly modest, a 5-megapixel Micro Four Thirds sensor designed for low-light underwater work. But the key was the bright flash array that bounced massive amounts of light off the wreck, allowing the camera to operate at very low ISO, with clean, noise-free images. The final product is what Anthony Geffen, CEO of Atlantic Productions, calls a digital twin a photorealistic, one-to-one replica of the Titanic, as if all the water had been drained away. This is the Titanic as no one has ever seen it before. It revealed details that previous expeditions had missed entirely. One discovery stands out, a steam valve in the boiler room that was left open. This valve likely kept an emergency generator running as the ship went down, providing power for distress signals and lighting until the very end. The engineers stayed at their posts, maintaining power while the ship sank beneath them. The scan also revealed the nature of the hull breach. For decades, the assumption was that the iceberg tore massive gashes in the Titanic's side. But structural analysis using the scan data tells a different story. The iceberg created a series of small punctures, some the size of a sheet of paper, spread across 6 watertight compartments. The Titanic was designed to stay afloat, with 4 compartments flooded. 6 was fatal. The ship did not die from a single catastrophic wound. It died from a slow, inevitable flooding. For Park Stevenson, a Titanic historian who has studied the wreck for 20 years, the digital twin is a true game-changer. Stevenson was able to examine the wreck in a warehouse where the digital model was projected at life-size. He could walk alongside the ship, zoom in on individual features, and cross-reference what he saw with survivor testimony from 1912. For the first time, he could see the Titanic in full context. As soon as he saw the digital twin images, he knew. He had never seen the Titanic like this before, and it felt right. The model also revealed a ruptured porthole, likely caused by the iceberg's impact, another piece of evidence confirming the ship's final moments. What makes this digital twin historically significant is not just its level of detail, but its timing. The Titanic is deteriorating, microbial colonies are eating away at the iron, the structure is collapsing. Parts of the ship that were visible in the 1980s have now disappeared entirely. We are witnessing the slow death of an icon. The digital twin captures the wreck in its current state, preserving it before it falls apart completely. This is a baseline record, a snapshot of the wreck before it becomes unrecognizable. Richard Parkinson, Magellan's chief executive, described the volume of data as enormous and the results as astonishing. The team believes this data represents 10 times more information than any previous underwater 3D model ever attempted. The findings were assembled into a documentary called Titanic, The Digital Resurrection, produced by National Geographic and now streaming. The documentary tells the story of the expedition and the implications of the digital twin for future research. Dr. John Shears, the polar geographer who led the mission, described the moment the cameras landed on the ship's name as jaw-dropping. The team had successfully completed what many said was impossible battling, constantly shifting sea ice, blizzards, and temperatures dropping to minus 18 degrees Celsius in the Antarctic context. But here, in the North Atlantic, the challenges were depth, pressure, and weather. The mission succeeded because the team refused to give up. But here is where it gets strange. Despite having the most detailed map of the Titanic ever created, mysteries remain. Stevenson himself admits that there are aspects of the Titanic story that still do not make sense. He has seen enough evidence to seriously question even some of the most basic assumptions about what happened that night. The digital twin provides answers, but it also raises new questions. How much of the official narrative is accurate? What details did survivors misremember or misreport in the chaos? And, most hauntingly, how many other wrecks are out there waiting for technology to catch up and reveal their secrets? The Titanic is just one ship. The ocean holds thousands.
Since we don't have ships like this that have been recovered at all, it's something we haven't seen before. It's unique in the world, and I think it's going to be more excavations around here, and we're going to find some more unique objects. But this, what we have today, it's just fantastic.
For From the cold depths of the Atlantic, we travel to a very different kind of underwater site, one that is shallow enough for recreational divers, but has remained untouched for over 5 centuries. The Baltic Sea off the coast of Ronneby, Sweden, is brackish and cold, with salinity levels so low that shipworms, the wood-eating organisms that destroy most ocean wrecks, cannot survive. This quirk of chemistry has preserved wooden shipwrecks here in near-pristine condition. In the 1970s, a local diving club discovered something extraordinary, lying just 10 metres below the surface, near the island of Stora Ekon. It was a ship. And not just any ship, a royal warship from the late medieval period, one of the most important vessels of its time. The wreck sat quietly for decades, largely ignored, until the year 2000, when regional authorities in Blekinge County learned that this might be a medieval warship of significant historical value. Archaeological investigations began, and by 2013, researchers had identified the wreck as the Gribshunden, also called the Griffin, the flagship of King Hans of Denmark. The ship sank in 1495 while anchored in a natural harbour en route to a critical diplomatic meeting in Kalmar, Sweden. King Hans was travelling to negotiate Sweden's re-entry into the Kalmar Union, a political alliance that united Denmark, Norway and Sweden. The loss of the flagship was a disaster. Historical accounts say the ship caught fire and sank, though no evidence of fire has been found on the wreck itself. King Hans survived, watching from a nearby boat as his magnificent warship slipped beneath the waves. In August 2015, the world's attention turned to the Gribshunden when a team of archaeologists, led by Professor Johan Rönnby of Södertörn University, raised an object from the wreck that no one had seen in over 500 years. It was the ship's figurehead, and it was terrifying. The figurehead is carved from a massive oak beam 3.4 metres long, 11.1 feet, and weighs 300 kilos, or 661 pounds. The design is a chimera, a dragon-like sea monster with lion ears, a crocodile mouth and bared teeth. And, clenched in its jaws, is a screaming human figure. Rönnby described it as some kind of fantasy animal, a dragon with lion ears and a crocodile-like mouth. The figurehead was brought to the surface in front of a crowd of thousands who had gathered to witness the event. Rönnby made a remark that captured the moment perfectly. Last time it looked at the world, Leonardo da Vinci and Christopher Columbus were still living. The figurehead is probably the only one of its kind left in the world from a 15th century ship. It was conserved at the Danish National Museum and is now exhibited at the Blekinge Museum in Sweden. The preservation is extraordinary. After 5 centuries underwater, the wood retains fine details, the frilly nose, the exposed teeth, the agonised expression of the human caught in the monster's jaws. The figurehead was not just decorative. In Viking and medieval maritime culture, these carvings served multiple purposes. They helped illiterate sailors identify ships at a glance. And they were believed to ward off evil spirits during hazardous ocean voyages. The Gribshunden's monster was designed to strike fear into enemies and protect the crew from supernatural threats. The itself is in remarkable condition. The starboard side is intact from the keel to the first deck, with the superstructure collapsed outboard and preserved in the sediment. Unlike the Vasa, Sweden's other famous preserved ship, the Gribshunden is not as complete, but it is older and arguably more important. Marcus Sandekja, director of the Blekinge Museum, explained that there are no other warships from this time period anywhere in the world. The Gribshunden is contemporary with Columbus's ships. Studying its construction could provide clues about how the vessels of the Age of Discovery were built. Chronological analysis, tree ring dating, revealed that the ship's timbers came from northeastern France and were felled in the winter of 1482 to 1483. The ship was likely constructed in Flanders or the Netherlands, making it an international project. The Gribshunden was built for power and prestige. In addition to the figurehead, archaeologists have recovered gun carriages, a windlass for anchors, crossbow arrows, remnants of chainmail, and multiple pieces of artillery. As of 2024, the wreck has revealed remains of 14 artillery pieces, including 3 still in situ. 2 recently discovered guns have their iron gun tubes and breech chambers intact. This was a warship designed to dominate. In 2020, archaeologists made a startling discovery buried in the silt inside the ship's hull. They found a barrel containing the skeleton of an Atlantic sturgeon, an ancient prehistoric fish that can live for over 60 years and grow to massive sizes. This particular specimen was 2 meters long, or 6.56 feet. Brendan Foley, marine archaeologist at Lund University and project coordinator for the excavations, explained that the sturgeon was not food for the crew, it was a propaganda tool. The Atlantic sturgeon was a symbol of high status and power in the medieval period. King Hans was transporting this fish to impress the Swedes. It was a demonstration of wealth, access and dominance proof that he controlled resources from distant regions. The Gripshunden excavations have been conducted by an international team from 10 different countries, involving 40 researchers. Brendan Foley and Johan Rundby have led the efforts, which included the recovery of one of the earliest firearms ever found on a ship anywhere in the world. The project has also uncovered a beautifully formed drinking tankard with a crown-like engraving, further evidence of the ship's royal status. The Gripshunden is considered the world's best preserved ship, of the kind Columbus used for his expeditions to America, making its construction a critical focus for researchers. But questions remain. Why did the ship sink? Historical accounts from the time are contradictory. One teenage crew member, Tige Crabbe, remembered 20 years later that about 150 people were aboard, and some died in the calamity. But Crabbe's memory placed the shipwreck in 1494, not 1495. Archaeological investigations have revealed no evidence of fire, contradicting the official story. If the ship did not burn, what caused it to sink? And why was it anchored in a shallow natural harbour when it went down? The Gripshunden holds the answers, but we are barely scratching the surface. Every season brings new discoveries, and the cold, brackish waters of the Baltic continue to protect the secrets locked in the wood.
One of the world's most notorious shipwrecks of the 20th century, explorer Ernest Shackleton's Endurance has been discovered off the coast of Antarctica more than a century after it sunk. The Endurance was discovered 3,008 metres below sea level in the Weddell Sea.
She hasn't been seen in over 100 years. This is the Endurance, resting nearly 10,000 feet down in the dark, freezing waters at the bottom of Antarctica's Weddell Sea.
From the medieval Baltic, we jump to the most hostile ocean on Earth. The Weddell Sea off the coast of Antarctica is a frozen hell. The water temperature hovers just above freezing. Massive icebergs drift through the currents. Blizzards can strike without warning. And beneath the surface, at a depth of 3,008 metres, 10,000 feet, sits one of the most famous shipwrecks in history. For over a century, the location of Ernest Shackleton's ship Endurance was unknown. Shackleton, the legendary Irish-born British explorer, lost the ship in 1915 when it became trapped in pack ice during his attempt to cross Antarctica. The ship was crushed slowly over months as the ice tightened its grip. On October 27, 1915, Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The crew watched as the Endurance was swallowed by the ice and disappeared beneath the frozen sea. On February 3, 2022, the research vessel SA Agulhas II departed from Cape Town, South Africa, heading for one of the most remote locations on the planet. The ship carried 60 maritime archaeologists, engineers, scientists, and subsea technicians. Their mission: find the Endurance. The expedition was organised and funded by the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust and named Endurance 2-2. The team faced extraordinary challenges. The Weddell Sea is one of the most difficult places on Earth to operate. Sea ice constantly shifts. Weather can turn deadly in minutes. Temperatures drop to minus 18 degrees Celsius. And the target was a shipwreck that had not been seen for 107 years. The team deployed underwater drones that combed the seafloor for 2 weeks in the area where the ship was recorded to have sunk. The search zone was based on the last recorded position logged by Frank Worsley, the Endurance's captain. Worsley was a skilled navigator, and his records proved remarkably accurate. The drones used sonar and cameras to scan the seabed, searching for any sign of the wreck. On March 5, 2022, exactly 100 years to the day after Shackleton was buried on South Georgia Island, the cameras landed on something extraordinary. It was the name Endurance, in brass lettering on the ship's stern, with a 5-pointed star below it. The ship had been found. The Endurance sits upright on the ocean floor, almost completely intact. The bow is clearly recognisable. The stern, though battered, is still structurally sound. The masts have fallen, but much of the rigging remains. Portholes are visible. Dishes sit where they were left. Even a pair of boots can be seen resting on the deck. Mensenbound, a maritime archaeologist and director of exploration for the expedition, called it a milestone in polar history. The ship is in such good condition that you can see the name on the stern as if it were written yesterday. The reason for this preservation is twofold. The cold water inhibits bacterial growth, and the Weddell Sea has no wood-eating shipworms. These organisms, which destroy wooden wrecks in most oceans, cannot survive in the freezing, low-oxygen environment. The Endurance has been sitting in a natural preservation chamber for over a century. The Endurance 2-2 team completed a 3D laser scan of the ship, using the same photogrammetry techniques that were applied to the Titanic. The resulting data is expected to be released in a feature-length documentary. The scan captures every detail: anchors, rigging, hull planking, even the damage caused by the ice that crushed it. Dr. John Shears, polar geographer and mission leader, described the moment as jaw-dropping. The team had successfully completed what many people said was impossible. What makes the Endurance discovery emotionally powerful is that we have extensive photographic documentation of the ship before it sank. Frank Hurley, Shackleton's expedition photographer, took hundreds of images of the ship during its final months. We have photos of the crew on deck. We have images of the ship being crushed by the ice. We have the moment when Shackleton ordered the men to abandon ship. And now we have images of the wreck on the seafloor, sitting almost exactly as it looked when it went down. The Endurance is frozen in time. Shackleton's survival story is legendary. After the Endurance sank, the crew camped on the ice for 5 months. They then took to the lifeboats and eventually reached desolate Elephant Island, their first landfall in 497 days. Shackleton knew they could not stay. He and 5 men, including Frank Worsley, took one of the lifeboats, the James Caird, and sailed 800 miles across the most dangerous ocean on Earth to reach South Georgia Island. They arrived barely alive. Shackleton then crossed an uncharted mountain range on foot to raise the alarm at a whaling station. After 3 failed attempts over 4 months, he finally returned to Elephant Island and rescued the 22 men he had left behind. Not a single life was lost. His telegram to his wife stated simply, "I have done it, and not a single life lost." Endurance is now designated a monument under the International Antarctic Treaty and cannot be disturbed. No artifacts can be removed. The site can only be photographed and documented. This protection ensures that the wreck will remain, as it is a time capsule of one of the greatest survival stories in human history. But the discovery also raises questions. The Endurance is remarkably intact for a ship that was crushed by ice. How much of the internal structure remains? Are there artifacts still inside the ship? And most intriguingly, what else is down there? In 2024, the wreck of Shackleton's final ship, the Quest, was discovered off the coast of Labrador, Canada, sitting upright in 390 meters of water. If the Quest survived, what other lost ships are waiting to be found? The ocean does not give up its dead easily. But when it does, the revelations are staggering.
A truly historic discovery in southern Alabama, where the last known slave ship to arrive in the United States has been found. It was called the Clotilda. It sailed to the U.S. in 1860 with 110 souls on board from a slave port in the West African country of Benin.
From Antarctica, we move to the warm, murky waters of the American South. The Mobile River in Alabama is a slow-moving waterway that empties into Mobile Bay and then the Gulf of Mexico. The river is shallow, muddy, and choked with sediment. It is not the kind of place where you expect to find history. But in 2018, a journalist named Ben Raines, working for the news site AL.com, discovered something in this river that changed everything. He found a shipwreck. And not just any shipwreck, he found the last known slave ship to arrive in the United States. The discovery began with luck. In 2018, strong winds pushed water levels in the Mobile River to extreme lows, exposing parts of the riverbed that were normally submerged. Ben Raines, who had been researching the story of the Clotilda, began exploring the area where the ship was believed to have been burned and sunk. He found several shipwrecks. Experts were called in, including James Delgado of the maritime archaeology firm Search, Incorporated, along with teams from National Geographic and the Smithsonian Institution's Slave Wrecks project. The first wreck Raines found turned out to be too large, but the team kept searching, and in April 2018, Raines pulled up the first piece of the Clotilda to see the light of day in 160 years. The Alabama Historical Commission hired Search Incorporated to verify the find. The work was painstaking. The Mobile River is not like the clear waters of the Caribbean. Visibility is zero. Archaeologists had to dive and map the wreck by feel, using hand measurements and careful documentation. Kyle Lent, a maritime archaeologist with Search Incorporated, examined wooden planks from the hull in the delta waters north of Mobile Bay. The team took wood samples to understand what the ship was built from and to confirm its identity. The Clotilda was a two-masted schooner, 86 feet long with a 23-foot beam, built between 1855 and 1856 by Captain William Foster for Timothy Meagher, a wealthy mobile landowner and shipbuilder. Researchers combed through hundreds of original sources from the period and analysed records of more than 2,000 ships operating in the Gulf of Mexico in the late 1850s. They discovered that the Clotilda was one of only 5 Gulf-built schooners insured during that time. Registration documents provided detailed descriptions of the ship's construction and dimensions. According to these records, there was only one Gulf-built schooner 86 feet long with a 23-foot beam and a 6-foot, 11-inch hold. That was the Clotilda. The ship was built of southern yellow pine planking over white oak frames and was outfitted with a 13-foot-long centerboard. National Geographic engineer Arthur Clarke analysed a nail from the wreck and found it was nearly 99% pure iron, consistent with fasteners used in shipbuilding in Alabama in the 1850s. Evidence mounted. The ship's dimensions matched. The construction materials matched. The location matched historical accounts. And critically, there was no evidence of fire damage to the wood samples recovered from the wreck, a detail that matched revised interpretations of Captain Foster's own journal. In May 2019, the Alabama Historical Commission officially announced that the wreck was the Clotilda. Lisa Demetropoulos-Jones, executive director of the Alabama Historical Commission, emphasized that physical and forensic evidence powerfully suggested this was the Clotilda. The story of the Clotilda is a story of greed, cruelty, and defiance of federal law. By 1860, importing slaves into the United States had been illegal for over 50 years. Congress banned the international slave trade in 1808, but southern plantation owners, enriched by the booming cotton trade, wanted more enslaved labor. Prices in the domestic slave trade had skyrocketed. Timothy Meagher allegedly made a bet with northern businessmen that he could smuggle a cargo of Africans into Mobile Bay under the nose of federal officials. He chartered the Clotilda and enlisted Captain Foster to sail to the notorious slave port of Ouidah in present-day Benin. Foster left West Africa with 110 young men, women, and children crowded into the ship's hold. One girl reportedly died during the brutal 6-week voyage. The human cargo, purchased for $9,000 in gold, was worth more than 20 times that amount in 1860 Alabama. After transferring the captives to a riverboat owned by Meagher's brother, Foster brought the Clotilda into the port of Mobile at night and had it towed up the Spanish River to the Alabama River at 12 Mile Island. He then burned the schooner to the water's edge before sinking it to destroy evidence. The crew was paid off and told to return north. The African captives were divided between Foster and the Meaghers, with 30 captives retained by Timothy Meagher on his property north of Mobile. These individuals could not be legally registered as slaves because they were smuggled into the country after the ban. When the Civil War ended, they were effectively emancipated. Many of the formerly enslaved people from the Clotilda returned to Magazine Point and formed a community they called Africatown. One of the survivors, Cudjoe Lewis, also known as Kosula or Kazula, became the last living person to tell the story of the transatlantic slave trade from personal experience. In 1927, author Zora Neale Hurston travelled to Plateau, Alabama, to interview Cudjoe Lewis, who was 86 years old. Of the millions of men, women, and children transported from Africa to America as slaves, Cudjoe was then the only person alive who could describe the raid that led to his capture and the Middle Passage voyage. Cudjoe's testimony, along with the testimonies of other Clotilda survivors passed down through their descendants, created one of the best documented accounts of the transatlantic slave trade. Lorna Gale Woods, a descendant of Charlie Lewis, another Clotilda survivor, described the discovery of the wreck as overwhelming. "The excitement and joy is overwhelming," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The Clotilda is part of a larger effort by the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture through the Slave Wrecks Project, led by curator Mary N. Elliott and co-director Paul Gardullo. The project seeks out slave shipwrecks around the globe, including finds off the coasts of South Africa, Mozambique, Senegal, and the US Virgin Islands. The Clotilda, however, is unique. It is the most intact transatlantic slave trade ship wreckage ever found anywhere in the world. Despite being submerged for over 160 years and dynamited at some point in the more recent past, the ship offers crucial historic and archaeological knowledge about this global human holocaust. But mysteries remain. What else is buried in the Mobile River sediment? The wreck site is partially obscured, and much of the ship remains unexcavated. Archaeologists are developing new techniques for excavating and conserving artifacts without damaging the fragile site. There are also unanswered legal and ethical questions. The wreckage is now mostly located on private property. Who owns the ship? Who decides what happens to it? And how can the interest and publicity generated by the discovery be harnessed to foster economic and racial justice in the Africa Town community, which continues to face environmental and societal inequities 160 years later? The Clotilda is more than a shipwreck. It is a tangible link to names and stories passed down through generations, and it is a reminder that the past is never as distant as we would like to believe.